All right, welcome to Season 2, Episode 9 of Education in Color. Today I am joined by a very special guest, and as you can tell, we got a little bit of new studio space, which thank you, Christian, for lending us the space. But I want to introduce the guest, Senator Zellnor Myrie.
Thanks for having me, and congrats on the new space.
I appreciate it, man. We were just geeking about this 5 minutes before the set. Look, we have ambient lighting. We didn't have this before. But I'm just going to dive right into the first question, which is, what were some of the most formative experiences for you growing up in Prospect Lefferts Gardens that influenced your career choices?
Yeah, so for those who don't know, Prospect Lefferts Gardens is in the heart of Brooklyn and central Brooklyn, affectionately known as PLG. Growing up, it wasn't known to me as PLG. It was known as Flatbush. There's some people that argue all of Brooklyn at one time or another has been referred to as Flatbush. But it is a really incredible community, a diverse community, a strong Caribbean presence. Both of my parents are from the Caribbean, and a lot of folks who immigrate to Brooklyn come to that neighborhood. It's in fact called Little Caribbean. That is a designation because of those immigration patterns. And growing up in a rent-regulated house, going to public schools in the neighborhood, you had no choice but to think about how you needed to be successful. And particularly, and you know this, when you have immigrant parents, there is that pressure of wanting to do well, and not in an unhealthy way, but because you know how much your parents gave and how much they sacrificed to get to the country, the opportunities that you were given. And so I knew early on that education was really going to be my ticket to success. And that is what was embedded in me very early on. Now, I didn't have lawyers in my family. There weren't lawyers that I knew in the neighborhood. And so I didn't know early on that I was going to be a lawyer. But I did go, my middle school at the time was called the Crown School for Law and Journalism. And in college, I ended up being a communications major and with a journalism concentration. And of course, I eventually went to law school. So to the extent that the name of the school and the environment and the surrounding engendered that passion in me later on in life, I'm really grateful to have grown up in PLG.
Thank you for that. And I got a burning question I got to ask now, because you said the neighborhood's like a Caribbean neighborhood. How's the oxtail?
I mean, we have the best oxtails in the city. I will go toe to toe with anybody on that. But even if I'm not talking about restaurants, I say my mom's oxtails are the best oxtails in the city. But one of the policy things that I really want to get to is bringing down the price of oxtails. I mean, come on now. It's getting too expensive.
You got my vote on that, because I'm a fiend for oxtail. And now you just said that's where the best oxtail is. Listen, I'm going to have to take a trip over there after the shoot.
Come on, man. You got to come to Brooklyn. Come to Brooklyn.
And moving on to the next question, I want to ask you, how did your Costa Rican heritage shape your educational journey and worldview?
Well, you know, as I was talking about a little bit earlier, the immigrant experience is one that I think shapes how you look at education, perhaps in a different way than other folks. And what I mean is, you know, my mom, an amazing woman, when she came to this country, she moved to Brooklyn, she moved to Crown Heights, and she got a job in a factory. And the plan was for her to get some money to send back home and to then go back home. And of course, she never left. She stayed. And part of her ethos was, okay, if I'm here and I have brought this kid into the world and I want to see him be successful, I got to give him the tools to do that, even if I don't possess them myself. And one of the burning memories that I have is my mom saying, please pay attention in class because I can't help you with your homework. I can't do it. I don't know how to do it. My grasp on the language isn't as strong. And so you have to be the person to be successful on this. And she created the circumstances around me. She worked multiple jobs. She worked day and night so that I could just focus on school and that I could equip myself to be successful down the line. And so in a very real way, that immigrant experience, that two parents from Costa Rica who wanted me to be successful shaped how I viewed education, because it was really do or die for us.
You know, it's interesting you mentioned that, because I've had like a similar relationship with education as well. My mother, she had me when she was young, and she, I think, just finished her collegiate degree in Bangladesh, or maybe was in the process of doing so, but then had me. And so one of the things she always used to tell me was, focus on school, do what you got to do, because she would always talk to me about how much she wanted to do so. And one story sticks with me, and it's ironic because I actually interviewed the Queen's College president too.
Yeah.
But she enrolled in Queen's College when she came over here. The problem was every time she had to be dropped to school by my dad, I was in the car. And anytime she'd leave the car, I'd just be crying, throwing a fit. It's just like, acting like I'm dying, And the problem was she felt guilty. And I guess it's not a problem because I reaped the benefits from it. But I feel a little guilty about it because I'm like, damn, she really wanted to further herself educationally. But, suffice to say, she wasn't able to do it because of me. So then I kind of felt that, all right, if that was the case, then I'm going to have to take on the mantle and then do it in honor of you.
You got to put on for them, right? And one of the things that was inspiring to me about my mom was she ended up going to college in her 40s. So this was after I had, been in high school, was on my way to college. Yeah. The path was already laid out for me. She said, well, now I can look out for my own education. And that was inspiring to me, man, because she didn't have to do that. She had already been settled here. And I was like, if mommy is going back to school, then I need to further my pursuits to do grad school, law school, fully equip myself. And that's the dream of our parents. They came to this city really hoping to give us all the tools we needed. And I'm really proud to have made my mom proud, frankly.
Damn, now this is a feel-good episode. I'm going to have to cut a clip from this and show my mom, look, I got a little piece of you here.
Yeah.
But the next question I want to ask is, can you share how, I just lost my place in it. Oh, can you share a memorable experience from your time at Brooklyn Technical High School that left a lasting impact on you?
Absolutely. So at Tech, my first 2 years, as a freshman and a sophomore, I was a goofball. So, I graduated middle school. Frankly, Brooklyn Tech was a savior for me because I was a class clown in 7th and 8th grade, and my grades were not great, but I did well on the specialized high school exam, got into Brooklyn Tech, and even as a freshman and a sophomore, I still wasn't taking school seriously. And it wasn't until I had specific teachers at Tech that said, look, you're a talented individual. You got to focus up because you got to go to college and you can't get into a good school if you don't have good high school grades. And so I remember in particular my English and history classes. Those were my favorite subjects. I was terrible at math, terrible at science, but good at English and history. And I remember my English teacher, Mr. Baldwin, who taught me writing principles that I still use to this day. And I remember one of the quotes that he put before us in a class, and I'm forgetting the details of the story, but it was like a letter from like the 18th century. And they were like, a woman was writing to like her lover or something. And she said, I'm sorry that this letter is so long. If I had more time, it would be shorter. And I remember being like, what does that even mean? And it was the art of communicating in a succinct way, in a direct way, and that more writing is actually not better, and shorter writing that is to the point, if it's clear, is better. And those are the type of things that when I think about education and those little nuggets that you hold on to, it's unclear what becomes that nugget, but when you see it, you got it. And I remember that fondly from Tech. I remember Mr. Khan teaching me history and him being such a character and bringing the history to life. I mean, he would come into class with costumes. He would be so funny, but he was hard on you. And that was also instructive for me, that education could be fun, it could be challenging, and it could lay the foundation for some of the things that you go on to do. So I'm really, really proud of the experience that I had at Tech. Very, very fortunate. And, there's always a Tech night in the building. Anytime I go to event or anytime I'm talking to folks, they're like, oh, wait, you went to Brooklyn Tech too, right? Yeah. So I'm a big, big booster.
I appreciate that. And that's one thing I've always liked about the New York City public school system, the alumni network. Whether it's you're proud of the system in general, a singular school. Like, for example, me and Basilio, we actually went to the same high school that David Banks went to.
Wow.
So we were like, wait, really?
Yeah. He went to my elementary school.
Really?
So PS 161 on Crown Street. The chancellor went to that school, as did I, as did the former assembly member. We got a whole elementary school alumni network going exactly to your point.
It just goes to show you the New York City public school system is where it's at.
Here,
and
here.
You guys can pay me later for this free promo. The next question I want to ask is, why did you choose urban studies as your major at Fordham, and how has it informed your understanding of community dynamics?
Well, we live in the urban capital of the world, and we were raised in the greatest city in the world. And my experience growing up, whether it was housing, whether it was public safety, whether it was education, all of these things are informed by policies. And I wanted to know, how is it that these policies are determined? What historically has contributed to the fall and the rise of our urban centers? And I wanted some academic heft to be able to support the policies that were helpful for the people that I grew up with and that I now have the honor of representing. So this has really shaped my legislative approach in that anything that I do and any policy that I push has to be one that helps the collective. And sometimes what I've come to learn is what helps the collective may not be the most popular thing. It may not be the easiest political lift for you to carry, but it's important for us to do it. And so, shaping my legislative approach, my policy approach, that having that urban studies background and having some policy heft to my approach, I think has helped me in how I draft bills, how I try to get colleagues to support bills, how I look at developments in the community. I mean, we live in the heart, central Brooklyn. We were at the epicenter of gentrification. It is transforming at a rate that we cannot keep up with. And my view on that is also through a prism of urban studies and what has happened in the past. A lot of times in this business, we think that we're the first people to confront an issue. And you say, oh, well, this has never happened before, or there are no other places where this happened. No, we've been through this. And what we have seen in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s in this city should inform what we are doing now. We should be learning lessons from that time period. And it's at the risk of sounding trite, if history is not learned, it will be repeated. And to me, it was important for me to know what the history is, such that when we are confronted with some of those same problems, that we are doing it in a holistic way that is informed by the past.
Thank you for that. And since we're on the topic of policy, I want to ask you, what has been, I guess, the favorite, and I don't know like the logistics of how to properly phrase this, but basically, what's been your favorite policy that you have been a strong supporter of?
Yeah, that's hard. That's like asking who your favorite child is. We've had, thankfully, we've had the opportunity to pass, I think, some pretty monumental legislation in the state legislature. And the issues that I've focused on have been the ones that have been most important to my constituents. So one of the things that I have been very proud of is what we've done around gun safety. And you think about the issue of gun violence, certainly topical for what the tragedies that we've seen this past summer, including recently out in Jacksonville. When you think about gun violence, part of my problem has been, okay, you and I grow up in a city where we had to get used to seeing shootings every day on the news, the bad old days in New York. And even when things have gone down, we've still been confronted with gun violence. But I have always been upset that the media coverage has focused on mass shootings.
Right.
It has focused on the things that shock the conscience and not the everyday violence that we have grown to accept as normal. So I said, okay, well, we have to address the everyday gun violence problem, not just the mass shooting problem. And I started looking at, well, what is the source of that? What is happening? Because we don't sell guns in Brooklyn.
Right.
We don't sell guns in Queens.
Yeah.
So where are the guns coming from? And when you look at it, the numbers bear this out. 75% of guns recovered at crime scenes are from out of state. They do not come from the city. And something called the Iron Pipeline, right, along I-95, all of these states with lower gun safety regulations that allow for the proliferation of these guns to come up to the city. So I said, okay, well, we have to figure out how to hold those people accountable. Anyone that is bringing this instrument into our communities, any producer of the item that has not instituted any reasonable controls to ensure that those guns aren't making their way out to Brownsville or to Crown Heights. And so I introduced a bill that said you can hold the gun industry accountable, the bad actors in the gun industry accountable for the violence that's happening in our communities. It's the same thing that we do in every other corporate context. And the problem was the gun industry had enjoyed federal immunity from any type of accountability until we passed this law, that we passed it in 2021. We were the first state in the country to say you can hold them accountable. After we passed it, they sued us. We won, naturally. We won in court, and then New Jersey passed a similar law. Delaware passed a similar law. California passed a similar law. Washington State passed a similar law. We are now up to 8 states in the country that have a law to hold the gun industry accountable for that type of violence. And I'm really proud of that because that was not born out of my genius. It was me trying to confront an issue facing everyday New Yorkers, facing all of us about feeling safe. We've done a number of other things around voting, housing, etc. But I'm particularly proud of what we've done on gun safety because nothing else matters if you don't feel safe.
Right.
Nothing else matters if you don't feel safe. And I wanted to have a legitimate, concrete answer to my constituents when they came up to me and say, what are you doing to hold people accountable? And since that law has passed, the mayor, the attorney general, they've sued ghost gun companies. 5 companies have shut down as a result of us, of our law. And I suspect that there's going to be more to come. We're literally taking guns off the street. And that is something that I've been really proud of.
Oh, man, thank you for sharing. Honestly, I didn't even know that. And you said the iron pipeline, right? That's crazy that they even had federal immunity for so long.
I mean, you think about the tragedy of just losing one life, the devastation that causes to the family and that pocket of the community. We are losing hundreds of lives every single year, and no one has said, who's responsible for this? Now, of course, you have to hold the people that are using the guns accountable. There's no dispute on that. I think we all agree on that. But if the source is not being attacked, then we're going to continue to see the problem if we're just attacking at this end. And so I've tried to come upstream to say, let's get at that root. And hopefully that's something that's going to continue to spread. And hopefully the industry will change its ways. No one's trying to come for your legal guns. We are concerned about legal guns that go into the illegal market. And I think there's some momentum around the country to make it such that to do that will open you up to accountability in court.
And, you know, as my friend Larry always says, the best is yet to come. So you said that New York was the first state, and now we're up to 8. That's almost 20%. Soon, maybe it'll be everyone.
I feel good. And when you think about the population in those 8 states, it actually amounts to like 1 in 4 Americans, right? Like if you think about where we are, you know, in California, the population centers, and New York population centers, and how many millions of people now can have justice. This is about having justice. If I had a family member that was tragically killed by an illegal gun that was sourced from someone in Georgia not doing a background check or selling guns at the back of their store, that person they should not be in business. And the gun industry that's supporting that should not allow for that. So I'm excited about it, and of course I am a New York supremacist in that I think that we should be leading the way, and I'm glad that we've been leading the way on this.
Of course, you know what they say, New York to the world.
Come on now.
And so since we're on the topic of your political career and what you've done, I want to ask you, so in your early days working with the New York City Council, what did you learn about the inner workings of local governance?
Man, that was a crash course in how government works and how politics works. So I remember I started off as a young staffer. I was fresh out of college, and I was going to community meetings. I was in high-level meetings trying to figure out, okay, well, how do you write a bill? How do you push something? And one of the things that was most illuminating to me about city government was people actually know what they want. We have the role, government does, of executing that. And here's what I mean. I went to a community board meeting where we were talking about tenants not knowing what their rights were. They said landlords are able to take advantage of certain tenants because they just don't know.
Right.
They don't know what their rights are. And also, tenants are not fully appraised of what their responsibilities are. And so we're having this conversation, and I'm just a staffer, for a council member, and the community is talking, all right, so how do we get to a solution here? And so I went back to the office and I said, well, what if we did a tenant bill of rights? And what if we informed people on what they should know as a tenant? And my bosses were like, if you can figure out how to write this and you can figure out how to do it, then do it. And I worked with the community board, I worked with the housing organizations, and we drafted up a tenant bill of rights that took a couple of years to pass, but we ultimately got something passed where now in the city, in every single building, you will see a plaque near the mailbox that says what your rights are, what your responsibilities are as a tenant, and where you can get more information on that. And that to me was a perfect example of how government should work, and particularly how city government should work, because that was coming from the community, translated into some policy that has a tangible and real effect.
That's crazy, because I know I've always seen that whenever I go into buildings or whatever, tenant bill of rights. So now I know every time I see them, I'm be like,
you can blame us. You can blame us for that.
I wouldn't say blame. I say thank you guys for that, because that's crazy how just little things like that, listening to the community and saying, oh, because our tenants don't know what their rights are, why don't we just meet them halfway? I've realized that when it comes to city government, and especially when it comes to a lot of these policy movements, it really is like their constituents, they know what they want. But it's more about how they convey what they want, and then also it depends on who their representatives are and how, I guess, good they can guesstimate or kind of anticipate what they're going to need moving forward.
That's exactly right. And part of the problem, I think, in our political system and sometimes in our governing system is that we're talking at people. And so we're saying, here's what you need, and here's how we're going to solve the problem. And we're not just sitting back and asking them, so talk to me. What do you think the solution is here? Because they do know it. They're living it. And there's also, this little thing. We work for them. Like, they're the bosses. Some people say, oh, well, how does it feel to be elected and you don't have a boss? I say, I have 319,000 bosses, because that's how many people I represent. And they are not shy about telling me what the problem is. They're living through the problem. They should also be a part of the solution.
And on the topic of your career, I want to ask you, can you walk us through, in your early career, a challenge that you faced and how you've overcame it?
Yeah, so after law school, I worked for one of the premier law firms, not just here in the city, but in the world. And at that law firm, this was my introduction to being, an associate, and to learning what it means to be a professional lawyer. And I remember really for the first time in a long time feeling insecure about my own ability and my own talent. So you grow up and you're relatively smart, you're in the top % of your class, and that is how it is through elementary, middle school, college. You get to law school and it's like, okay, now you're with a bunch of other smart people. Like, you ain't the smartest kid in the room. And then even you get to the top of the law school where, like, you go to a premier law firm and then you're really not the smartest person in the room. And I remember having to deal with that and having to deal with that insecurity. And what I learned from that and going to different lawyers that I trusted at the law firm was lean into the things that you do the best. Don't try to compare yourself to other folks. Don't psych yourself out in thinking, I don't belong here. That imposter syndrome is so real, in thinking that you don't deserve to be in a certain spot or that you aren't capable of being excellent in a certain spot. Clear all of that out of your head. You got here for a reason.
Right.
You were selected for a reason. Lean into those reasons. And that was an early shift for me that helped me not compare myself and to say, like, I have certain skills and talents that they don't have, and that they're probably thinking, man, I wish I could and and they're looking as well. So that was I think instructive and informative period for me in my career, and a lesson that I've tried to bring to the legislature as well.
And that reminds me of an interesting thing. So right before the episode when we were talking about the whole yoga thing, so my yogi actually, she has this thing that she starts class with. She says, look to others for inspiration, not comparison. She's like, everyone's on a different journey and everyone's body does different things, what have you. So when you're looking, don't look for the sake of comparison, because then you're basically already shutting yourself down and making yourself feel bad about what you can't do without acknowledging and appreciating what you can do.
That's so true, and I think really embodies what I was just talking about. Like, you can look to others. It's not to say that you shouldn't look to others, but it should be for inspiration. And a lot of times, and I think particularly for New Yorkers of color, that we live in that comparison, and it's just so important, and I think key to say, nah, we're all built different. And I know sometimes you say, I'm built different. People try to say that as a, but it's true. Everyone's built different. Everyone's on a different timeline, and you can look for inspiration, but it shouldn't be to compare. That's right.
And then the thing is, too, is like, honestly, everyone has a different metric of success. And what I've realized over the years is that someone else's metric of success may not necessarily be my metric of success.
Exactly.
And
right.
so that's the problem. Like, for me, too, it was hard in my early 20s. There's just always constant comparison. There's always somebody, it's like that J. Cole song.
Yeah.
Always someone who's going to have a nicer whip, nicer everything. But then if you're not happy with what you got, that's it.
That's it. And this is so important. And I love the J. Cole reference. Like, there's always somebody better than you.
Yeah.
Like, in whatever it is that you choose to do, there's someone that is smarter than you. There's someone that is more talented than you. But that actually has nothing to do with you.
Yeah.
And you have zero control over it. There's no control over what other people do and what their paths are. I can only be present for me. And defining success for yourself, it's hard. It's much easier said than done. But that helps you. It helps you move at a different pace too. Because if you're like, this is the goal that I want to reach, then you're focused and you're not worried about what everybody else is doing.
Thank you for that. And this just making me think, listen, if you ever want like a mental health like fireside chat with me in the future, let me know.
Let's do it, man. I'm super into it. And just on this point as well, like, it took me a long time to find a good therapist. And someone that like I trusted, and someone that I thought could relate to some of the things that I've been through. And it has been the best thing that I've ever done. The best thing that I've ever done. So I want to plug therapy if you can do it, because you got to unwind a lot of stuff, and particularly if you've had some trauma in your life, which a lot of us unfortunately have. That really helps to ground you. It doesn't make you perfect, but it helps you recognize yourself and to do some of the things that we're talking about. So I'm totally into it. We're going to do a mental health fireside chat, whatever it is. We got to do more of that. I think we should be making it easier for people to access that. Me and my big state senator job took me a year to find therapy. And I had pretty good health insurance. That shouldn't be. This should be one of the easiest things for us to get because we all need it, and I'm a big fan of it.
Thank you for sharing that, because like even me, I've always been on the fence. It's always been kind of like finding the right fit for it.
That's right.
But now after talking about this today, I'm about to go on ZocDoc right now.
Yeah,
and be
man,
like,
check
what
it out.
Therapist near me?
And no pressure, right? It's all a journey. There was a long time in my life where I was very skeptical of therapy. I'm like, wait. Y'all want me to pay to go talk to somebody? Nah, I'm good, bro. I'll talk to another friend, but it is so key. And like some people don't need therapy every week, every other week, like it can be sporadic. It can be start and stop. I've started therapy and stopped. It took me a while to get more consistent with it. And so I would say don't feel any pressure, but dig around and see what you can do, man. I think you will see the benefit in your life.
Appreciate that. And so moving on to the next question I want to ask you is, what advice would you have for young kids coming out of Brooklyn, and even if you want to extrapolate it, New York City in general, on what they should do if they're aspiring for a career in public service?
So if you have any interest in public service at all, I would hone in on the second part of that phrase, and that's the service part. Because I think a lot of times people, and I don't mean this disparagingly, but people get enamored with what the public side of this is, right? And so they love to see people in front of a mic, on a podcast, on television, in a press conference. And that part is good and nice and has value, but that's not where you really learn how to serve. This is a small chunk of the entire day. And I would encourage people to not be consumed with the destination. So don't say, okay, well, one day I want to be this, or one day I want to be that. Learn how to serve. If you learn how to serve, then it will manifest itself in whatever it is the universe has intended for you. So I remember I came out of college 2008. This was the Great Recession. I had no job. But I was like very inspired. Obama was just elected. And I'm like, okay, well, I had taken a public service trip to South Africa for a couple of weeks, did some amazing things there. I came back and I said, okay, I want to serve. I started going to community board meetings. Didn't have a job, so I was going to every community board meeting. And I was doing the grunt work that nobody else wanted to do. So I was like I was filing 311 complaints about cracks in the sidewalk, you know, looking at quality of life stuff. Nothing glamorous. Nothing glamorous. There were no accolades in that. But that taught me what it meant to actually serve the community. What it meant to go out and talk to people, survey people, listen to what I was the chair of the neighborhood advisory board, where we had to ask the community, if we had X amount of money from the federal government, how would we spend it? And I spent entire summers just listening to people, That is how I learned how to do my job now, because my job now includes people coming to me and saying, here's where I think the priority is, here's what I think you should be doing. So I would encourage our young people, just learn how to serve, get active, and it doesn't require you, like, you don't got to go out there and be Barack on the corner, but you can talk to people. You can volunteer for your community board or your organization or some nonprofit, little things. And as you accumulate those experiences, it'll start to illuminate which direction you want to go in, because public service doesn't have to be politics. There is so many other avenues. Public service can and is teaching, being in front of a classroom. Like, you can gain some of those skills just learning how to serve as a young person. So I love the summer, because we always have a lot of young people in our office. We got interns. And I would encourage you, reach out to your elected officials. If this is anything of interest to you, hit us up, if you're interested, and just learn how to do the little things, and the big things will come.
I got two things about that I want to say. One is, I really want to focus on that listening piece, because one thing that I've realized is there's a difference between listening for comprehension and listening for the sake of responding. And so one of the things that I've realized is that when I am in these public sector spaces, one of the things that have helped me learn a lot is actually living vicariously through others' experiences, learning what worked for them in their career. And oftentimes these are people who have long 10, 20, 30-year careers, listening to what went well for them, what didn't go well for them. But then by doing so, you're able to kind of construct a little bit of a guideline as to what you can and can't do, but then put your own spin on it as well.
That's exactly right. And it's so key, listening for comprehension and not to respond. We live in a society now that is just hyper responsive, reactionary, instant. And the listening part is just not as strong. But when you listen, it's just a better experience for you, because you learn. You learn from what other people have gone through. And I think it's also important, you said, like, you learn what not to do. Right? Sometimes you listen to somebody and you're like, okay, I ain't gonna do that. But that's also helpful, because it helps you to see, well, what do I want to do, and what am I trying to do? So it's a really good point.
And then the second point, since you mentioned teaching, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention New York City Men Teach. Next thing they'd be like, wait, you shot an episode? You didn't plug us in? All right, let me put this in your formal review. Right. But what are your thoughts on the New York City Men Teach program?
I mean, this is so important. It's such an incredible initiative. As someone who is a product of public schools in this city, I can count on one hand the men teachers of color that I have had. I did not have any in elementary school or middle school or high school. And this is, I think, a tragedy, given the percentages of our student population that are men of color. And it makes a difference to see somebody that looks like you in front of that classroom. Not just because it's important to see representation, but they can communicate certain things in an unspoken way. Just looking at how a teacher dresses. Like, if I saw one of my teachers come in, you know, with a collared shirt, some slacks, and some J's, I'd be like, oh, wow, okay, that's me. I can be that. And then you receive everything that they say a little differently. And that's so I'm such a fan of the program. I'm such a fan of the initiative. And, you know, there's a world in which if I wasn't doing politics, like I'd be in a classroom talking to our students and trying to give back and publicly serve in that way. So I'm happy that I get to be tangentially involved in the program this way. But I think it's wonderful, and we should be doing everything we can to support it.
Appreciate that, man. And the one thing I will say is when you mentioned the whole, you know, how a teacher carries themselves in the classroom, an anecdotal experience from my days teaching is anytime I used to pull up to the classroom, whether it was like, you know, suited up or normally, like the kids really resonated with me because one of the things that I always like to do is talk about our feelings. And I know it kind of sounds odd, right? When you look at education, if you want to focus more so on emotional aspects as opposed to the content. But the reason why is because oftentimes when you focus on that emotional aspect first, the content then naturally comes to the students because they're enthused about being in that setting. And so really having that representation and really feeling nurtured and welcomed in your environment helps out a lot.
It's such a big deal. And you don't know what examples the child has or doesn't have in their community or in their home. You know, unfortunately, there is a significant amount of our student population that don't have male figures in their lives, whether that is in the home or in the community. And that one teacher may be the person. And they may be the determinant of whether or not that kid is going to go on to be a successful and productive member of our communities. And so it is paramount that we have that type of connection with them. You don't know, like, you know, you're talking about feelings with kids. They may not be talking about their feelings at home. They may not feel safe to, or their parents just may be too busy and they're just not around. So this is, it's just super, super key. And I'm grateful for every person that takes up that mantle and says, I'm going to step up and I'm going to do that. You are changing so many lives just by being present. So I'm grateful to the men that have stepped up as well.
Appreciate that, man. And I want to ask, how do you think that your unique blend of legal expertise as well as the urban studies experience you had complement your experience in the Senate?
I mean, it shapes the way that I legislate. So I talked earlier about what we did on gun safety. That was a legal argument. That came from me reading cases and finding what the federal laws were and how the states could be a player in that arena. I would not have been able to do that in that way had I not had the legal background. And then you combine that with urban studies and urban problems and trying to figure out what's best for our city and looking at actual solutions. I think I have combined those things to do some pretty important things. So on the gun safety stuff, you heard some of it. We also did something that had not been done before, was we declared gun violence a public health crisis. And that nowhere in the country had been done prior to us doing it. And as such, we required that the state put in $10 million every single year to community and hospital-based intervention programs to help stop gun violence from happening, and also to be there when it does happen, to intervene and say, all right, let's have cooler heads prevail. Let's give the victim the resources that they need. Let's deal with the alleged perpetrator in the justice system. But let's do a community public safety plan that had not been done before on the state level. And I don't think I would have had that perspective about community, about a holistic approach, had I not had that urban studies background either. And I think it's also informed some of the other things that we've worked on, certainly in housing, where we fought in 2019 for the strongest rent laws that we saw in a generation. This was the result of me growing up in a rent-regulated apartment in Brooklyn, me seeing the impacts of housing, not just in Brooklyn, but throughout the city. If your housing is unstable, nothing is stable in your life, right? If you are forever worrying about, can I afford the rent? Am I going to be evicted? Can I stay here? Nothing in your life is going to go right. And it was a big reason why I ran for office. But up until then, the laws had predominantly been written by the real estate industry, and there was nothing that was there to protect the tenants. And so I try to use some of my legal acumen to look at what the history of our rent laws were, and then to match that up with what the reality was in the day. And thankfully, we were able to marry the two and protect millions of people in the city and in the state. So I'm really grateful for my educational foundation. Without those things, I would not have the tools to be the type of legislator I am now, to be the leader that I am now. And I wouldn't have known that, 20, 25 years ago, that would be the result. But here we are. And I bring that to my work every single day.
And, I really do admire the fact that as you were talking, I keep noticing you keep coming back to community. It seems as if a lot of the policies, the legislatives that you are pushing stem from that communal aspect, that holistic approach. And it's refreshing to see that actually happen now, especially in New York City politics.
I mean, to me, that's my job. I represent the community. Yeah. I don't understand people that come to this work and come to politics not thinking about community and not thinking about what is in the best interest of the collective. And, figuring out who the community is, that's also a difficult thing, right? Because even within one district, I have many communities who have differing views and competing views. Certainly when we look at the city of New York, there are competing views all throughout the city. And the trick for us, I think, as policymakers is trying to strike the balance such that whatever policy you're putting out does the least harm to most people, but also inspires people to be better and to do better. And I'm really grateful that I get to work for the community for a living. Like, I get to wake up and say, all right, how can I help the city today? How can I help someone who is struggling today? And it's dope. I love it. I'm really, really grateful for it. And the community is what sent me here. I did a job interview with them, and they then went into the ballot box and said, okay, we're going to hire him. And then I got to renew that contract every 2 years. I got to go back to the community and say, give me another chance to try to be that person for you. And thankfully, 3 times the community has renewed my service contract. And as long as the people will continue to have me, I'm going to continue to seek being able to represent them.
Thank you for sharing that, man. Just let me know when you enter the presidential race. That way I could just have my ballot ready beforehand.
You're going to get me in trouble on this podcast, man.
Don't worry. We'll cut this. Wink. But now that we're winding down to the end part of our segment, I got 2 last questions that I want to ask you. One being, looking back, what advice would you give your younger self just starting out at Fordham?
I'd say take the pressure off of yourself. I remember walking onto that campus, which is a beautiful campus. I went to Fordham in Rose Hill, so in the Bronx, BX, stand up. And I remember being in awe of the campus, the institution, the people, and wanting to be successful more than anything else. And wanting to be excellent at the cost of everything else. And so I was not doing a lot of the extracurricular things that I probably should have been doing. I wasn't hanging out and just growing up and figuring myself out. And I was just tunnel vision on being successful, improving myself in this institution. I was like, y'all not gonna have me up here and thinking that I'm some kind of second-rate student or that I don't belong here. And so I would tell that Zellnor, relax, bro. There's so much more ahead, and in fact, this is the very beginning. This is just this is the foundational stuff. You are gonna find so much happiness and purpose in life after this. So have some fun and don't be so hard on yourself. Soak it in. And I've been able to, oddly enough, in this job, there's been a lot of personal growth for me as well in thinking about, all right, what are the things that like Zellnor the man, what do I enjoy doing? What do I ultimately value in life? And it has allowed me to separate, who I am as the person from who I am as a public servant. And I think that pressure that we have certainly as the cost of tuition is going up, and I got more loans that I care to talk about. There's just so much pressure to perform, and I would tell my younger self, and I would tell all the other kids entering this phase of their life, remove some of that pressure. Find your passion. Find the things you like. Now, don't be out here like wasting your parents' money.
And partying every night.
You're partying every night, or you taking out. You don't have to pay these loans back. So ensure that you're reaping the benefits of the institution, but don't put so much pressure on yourself that you are rushing into adulthood without growing as a human being.
That one piece I want to focus on heavily before I move on to the next question, which even for me growing up, I was like, I want to grow up. I want to get a beard. I want to do this. I want to do that. Now I'm over here. I'm like, screw these taxes, man. I don't want to be an adult no more. I got to pay for everything. I go outside. Bill.
Yeah.
But then not only that, it's more so like your worldview. So my worldview, and I'm assuming a lot of other people's worldview, when you're a child, it's small.
Yep.
But then as you start to gain more life experiences, as things start to become bigger for you, you realize that the little problems you're focusing on in middle school, high school, even college, they don't even matter now. I don't even know why I was pressed for a lot of my issues back like 5-10 years ago.
Pressed.
Yeah.
Pressed. I mean, I remember thinking about, you're in high school and entering college. Like, man, he's so cool. Like, he has all the gear. He has all the girls. Like, I don't know where homeboy is today.
Yeah.
All these other people that we were looking up to, that we were trying to impress, and even in college, you hear someone participate in the classroom and they're like, man, oh my gosh, she's so smart. She's so sharp. She has all her stuff together. I wish I could be. No idea where these people are. And, it harkens back to what we were talking about earlier, too, about not comparing. But, like, you don't got it. There's, like, no rush to impress this person, no rush to adulthood. Like, you end up suppressing your inner child that ends up surfacing in other ways.
Just that manifests in like very like ugly ways.
Ugly ways, in ugly ways. And that's because we haven't dealt with who we are. And I'm dealing with that stuff now, even, like realizing, okay, these were things that if I had dealt with them in a healthy way growing up and as a freshman or sophomore, or et cetera, that I would be a different person today. And that's okay. Everyone goes through that. So I would encourage our younger people, like, the best is yet to come. It truly is. Enjoy this period of your life. Grow as a human first. Everything else is going to come.
And the last thing I'll say on that piece of comparison, because I always like talking about this topic, but this is another quote my yogi told me, which is it's kind of like a candle. I don't know, allegory, whatever you'd say, but essentially, someone else's light doesn't dim your own.
That's exactly right. It does not. It does not. And, our society has engendered this competition because it's so easy to see how other people are living, quote unquote, because you see somebody's IG post and you're like, man, he's living great. You have no idea what's like.
Right.
It's
It's like a
36.
facade at the end of the day,
facade. It's a highlight. We would never watch. I'm a big sports fan. If you just saw one highlight of a player, you would never like extrapolate from that one highlight
The whole life.
So, this is the greatest player of all time. It's like, no, actually, can I see them play in a game? Like, let me see, like, what are the statistics? Like, you could drop 50 one game and then drop nothing in all of the following games. It's like, so what did that actually mean? And so we look at social media and we see somebody post a highlight and we get all in our heads and say, oh my goodness, I wish I could. It's like, that's not real. And even if it was real, them being great doesn't dim you being great, right? And in fact, to take the candle analogy even further, like, to take that little candle to light your light.
There you go.
And then you take that light, you light somebody else's light, and now we all shining. Isn't that beautiful? Like, we can do that, but it takes sort of unwinding what has been, I think, a really systematic, like, competition first, success first, highlight first, and thinking about how we could just grow as a collective.
Thank you for that. That's like the perfect way to end the episode, because that's like such a philosophical quote. So I'm not going to ruin it by saying anything else after. But one thing, Thank you so much for coming on to this segment and speaking with us and giving us all these knowledge, like nuggets of wisdom. I was thinking of like something quirky to say, but then I had like a brain, not even a fart. It was just like all the cars trying to merge at once, and it was an accident. But anyone that you want to shout out, any sponsors, stakeholders, whoever, that's your designated camera right there. Feel free to shout them out before we end up.
So I will say, firstly, thank you for having me on. This is fun.
Thank you.
And I like being in this setting and being able to talk and being able to talk freely. And I'll just say to anyone who is watching, if you're interested in working with us or being on some of the issues that we mentioned, don't hesitate to reach out to my office. You can email us. We're at myrie@nysenate.gov. Again, myrie@nysenate.gov. You have ideas, things you want to fight for, or if you have complaints, send them to the email. Talk to us. I'm really, again, grateful to have been on today, and hopefully I can come back on a later episode, and we can just talk mental health and wellness and how we can grow as a community together.
Say less, man. I got you. But with that being said, that does wrap up season 2, episode 9. Thank you so much again, Senator Zellnor, for pulling up. And with that being said, I'm gonna see you guys next time for episode 10. You guys are gonna love the guest for that one. Take care.